enter upon the scriptural manner of living, both thinking and doing such things that are well pleasing unto thee. For you are the illumination of our souls and bodies, O Christ our God. And unto thee do ascribe glory, together with your fathers from everlasting, and your all holy, good, and life-creating spirits, now and ever, and unto the ages of ages. Amen. Okay, thank you so much. So we have been, before we had this interlude with the witches and sorcery, we were doing the Divine Liturgy, and we were going through some aspects of it. Now we covered most of the first part of the Divine Liturgy. Can anyone remember what is the name of the first part, you could say, of the liturgy? There's a couple of names, but can anyone mention what it's called? The Liturgy of?
The catechumens.
Yes, the Liturgy of the Catechumens. Sometimes it's called the Liturgy of the Word, but basically it's a part of the liturgy where the climax is at the Gospel, where we read the Gospel, we hear the sermon. And so now we're going to continue journeying through the liturgy. Now, it depends which tradition you have. In some traditions, straight after the reading of the Gospel and the sermon, we begin to sing the Cherubic Hymn, and the priest begins to read the special prayer that he reads during the Cherubic Hymn, particularly in the Greek tradition. In the Russian tradition, there's still a whole set of litanies. Now, these litanies of fervent supplication are also part of the Greek tradition. They just aren't as often used. But after these litanies, then we begin the Cherubic Hymn. Now, the Cherubic Hymn is also called the Cherubicon, is one of the most loved and beautifully sung hymns in the Orthodox Church. Many people, in their experience of the Orthodox liturgy, even if they're not Orthodox, can really sense there's a change in the moment of the liturgy at the singing of this hymn. And so it's something that we need to, of course, understand the words, what we're singing, and also some of the origins of the hymn. So I thought before I do this, let's look at, it's called the Cherubic Hymn. So we're talking about the cherubim. What are the cherubim? What is the tradition we have in the church? What is the identity of these angelic beings? So that's what I would like us to talk about tonight, and then go into the liturgy. Just 1 second. Okay, hopefully everyone can see the screen. If you can't see the screen, if you can't hear me, let me know and I'll stop. So here we have I actually can't remember, it's probably a Babylonian relief sculpture. But this is what would actually be a more ancient, probably obviously pre-Christian, but contemporary with the time of Moses and the beginning of the Israelites. This would be an image of what someone would imagine when they were talking about the cherubim, right? It's a winged being, like an angelic being, a messenger, some kind of being that is assisting to a deity, right? So this would have been the context from which the Jewish people would have understood these words and these beings, right, as revealed to them. So the word cherub comes from an Akkadian word. So I'm sure many of you have heard of Sargon of Akkad. Probably not about the original one, but about that guy that does the commentary. But the Akkadian word karabu, which means to bless, or one who blesses, is probably the origin of the word cherubim. And they were basically seen as these bodiless beings, these unearthly beings, who attended to God in a very direct way, in a close way. And so the wings represent their ability to constantly move and be attending to God, assisting God, like messengers, like what we would understand as angels. So the problem is that many of us, especially if we don't have an Orthodox background, where we have a better kind of source of understanding of the cherubim. Usually, the first thing you think about when you think of cherub are these very cute little angelic beings. I think the correct actually name for these would be little putis or puto, which comes from the Latin word I think, which means little boy, basically. But this is actually very recent. Although if you go to any kind of Roman Catholic country, especially if you go to Italy or if you go to Spain or I don't know, in France they have lots of images of this. Not much, okay. So yeah, I think when I was studying in Italy, I remember going to every church, and I mean all the Baroque type of churches were covered in these very cute, chubby little angelic beings with little cute wings floating around, carrying different things, carrying the cross or carrying something. And this is now in the English-speaking world, cherub. Usually, this comes to mind, and we even have words like cherubic, which is when someone's kind of chubby and cute. You say, "Oh, they're very cherubic." Um, but this began in the Renaissance, this type of imagery. And in fact, it's interesting. So it comes from people like Donatello and a few others. I think Donatello was actually one of the first people who started in his sculptures to put these kind of chubby beings. But it was drawn from a pagan tradition, from the kind of Cupid imagery in the ancient Greek world and then the later Roman world, of Cupid as this kind of little spirit of love, right? Who would shoot his little arrows. And so then there became this kind of resurgence of this pagan idea of these little spirits, as these little boy spirits with little wings, floating around and kind of, a little spirit of love and whatever like that. So it's actually not a very Christian image. Now, I don't want to talk too much about these cute little cherubs, but there's lots of theories about why they became so popular in imagery. Someone was telling me in Italy, I don't know if it's true, but that people like to see images of cute, healthy children because that wasn't actually the normative thing at that time. It was something that everyone wished to have, but it wasn't a normative thing. They're also sometimes seen as representing the souls of infants who died, kind of in the angelic world. So it's a light thing, but this is not at all what we talk about when we're thinking about the cherubim and we're singing about the cherubim in the Orthodox Church. It's something very different. So let's look at the ways in which the Scripture has kind of revealed the cherubim to us, what they do, what their role is. So probably the first time in Scripture, if you read it kind of in a linear fashion, we read about the cherubim in the book of Genesis. How after the fall, when Adam and Eve were expelled from the Garden of Eden, from paradise, from that place where they were in the presence of God, they were expelled, and God set up a cherubim and a flaming sword. So usually, and this is depicted here, this cherub holding the sword, guarding the gates back into paradise, right? And can anyone tell me why that's the case? Why would God want to guard paradise from Adam and Eve who had fallen into sin? Remember to click on your microphone. Any ideas? So when Adam and Eve had partaken of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, their eyes were opened and they disobeyed God, and so they'd fallen into sin. And so remember, there was also the tree of life. And God did not want them to partake of the tree of life and become immortal, living in sin. And so he protected them from immortal life. So death, in a way, was seen as a sign of mercy because they wouldn't continue eternally committing sin. So the cherub was guarding them from that. Now we should remember this story is very important in the whole story of salvation, because of course what we believe in, and you'll hear it in the hymnography and in the life of if you look at commentary on the Annunciation and things like that, that we believe that now that cherub has now placed his sword back in his sheath, and the gates of paradise are now open to us again through Jesus Christ. and he has revealed the tree of life. He becomes the tree of life when he's on the cross. And so the cherub no longer guards that gateway to paradise. But so we see that the cherubim were uh, the cherubim are beings that protect. Sorry, just letting someone in. They protect paradise. They protect the throne of God. They are guarding it, and this was also very much part of um, the ancient Near East uh, idea of angelic beings. Now, again, we see these. These are the Persian gates. They call the Persian gates to all nations at Persepolis, and you see again this would be kind of an ancient idea, ancient symbol of a cherub would actually be this like bull-like figure with a human face, with these wings. Now keep that in mind. This kind of these various animal parts of this being, and we see that in the vision of Ezekiel. So would also be a kind of a more ancient um, depiction of a cherub. Now remember, no depiction of the cherubim is really, how can I say, sufficient, because they are bodiless beings. And so the imagery that we have, of course, is usually imagery that tries to teach us something about the nature of them and not actually how they look, just to say. So the cherubim were guardians. Another very important aspect of the cherubim, when we see in visions, especially the vision of Ezekiel, was that they draw the chariot upon which God sits and moves, right? And so this is now an ancient depiction, a Phoenician depiction of a type of cherub. You see this winged creature with a human head and an animal body, kind of like what you would say is maybe like a sphinx, drawing a chariot of a warrior, right, or a king, right? And Ezekiel had a similar vision, and we're going to read a little bit about that vision. This is a iconographic style depiction of that, but I'm going to read it for you so you can kind of get an idea. Okay, so this would be what you see here. This image is a more traditional Orthodox um, image of the cherub, as in the vision of Ezekiel. So I'm going to read it for you. This is not in a direct line. There's a bit of a gap, but let me read it for you. Now the cherubim, so this is not Ezekiel seeing this. Now the cherubim were standing on the south side of the temple when the man went in, and a cloud filled the inner court. Then the glory of the Lord rose from above the cherubim and moved to the threshold of the temple. The cloud filled the temple, and the court was filled with the radiance of the glory of the Lord. The sound of the wings of the cherubim could be heard as far as the outer court, like the voice of God Almighty when he speaks. I looked, and I saw beside the cherubim 4 wheels, on one beside each of the cherubim. The wheels sparkled like topaz. As for their appearance, the 4 of them looked alike. Each was like a wheel intersecting a wheel. As they moved, they would go in any one of the 4 directions the cherubim faced. The wheels did not turn about as the cherubim went. The cherubim went in whatever direction their head faced, without turning as they went. Their entire bodies, including their backs, their hands, and their wings, were completely full of eyes, as were the 4 wheels. I heard the wheels being called the whirling wheels. Each of the cherubim had 4 faces. One face was that of a cherub. The second was the face of a human being. The third, the face of a lion, and the fourth, the face of an eagle. So this is the kind of image of the cherubim, and so we have at least partially this image here. So what can we say about this image of Ezekiel? We see an image of a chariot. So we see what we would say is an image of these 4 angelic beings, these seraphim, that were covered in eyes, all-seeing beings. They could see in every direction. They were totally receptive to the image and to the presence of God, and underneath them were these amazing wheels that could turn in any direction, that were intersecting one another. And basically, what this image was also showing is that the God Almighty rests upon this chariot, and he can go wherever he wills. the part of this vision of Ezekiel was to show that God can go from his presence in the temple to anywhere. He can follow the Israelites into Babylon. He can be present wherever his people are. And this is important in when we celebrate the divine liturgy, because we also believe, we don't believe that God is only present in one church in the whole world. Like the Jews understood, at least at that time, the presence of God was definitely in the temple. Now we understand, especially after Pentecost and the raining down of the Holy Spirit upon the church, that God can be present everywhere. And this image kind of affirms this. Now we see this also, this image of God being upborn on.
Can I ask, Father?
Yes, do you have a question?
On the image that you just presented,
Yes.
I could be wrong, but isn't that the four representations of the four apostles who wrote the Gospels?
Yes. So yeah, so you see now when the Christians, it was revealed to them, it was given to them that four Gospels were the true apostolic Gospels, and the four evangelists. One of the connections they made with that, of course, is that Jesus Christ comes to the world upon these four, let's just say, authors of the Gospels, and they represent the four creatures, that the vision of these creatures, which is the eagle, the ox, the man, and the lion. Right, and that's why each gospel writer has been assigned one particular of these angelic creatures, that was revealed. So who can tell me which one is which? So we've got an eagle, an ox, a man, and a lion. Don't read the text though, because it's going to give it away. But can anyone tell me? So who is assigned the eagle?
Is that the Apostle John?
Yes, the Apostle John. I hear a hand going up, but in these talks you just got to shout it out. So the Apostle John, that's correct. And the ox? Or the bull? Who's the bull? So the bull represents the author, Luke. And the lion, we should know the lion, is?
Saint Mark.
Saint Mark, yes. And then the angel, the man, is Matthew. Now, there are some explanations, of course. So John's gospel is not like the synoptic gospels, the three gospels that follow a similar pattern. John's gospel is different. It's a more theological gospel in that it almost looks from above. It looks at the life of Christ as even from the beginning of creation. So it has a different perspective, a lofty perspective. And that's how John wrote, right? Then we have the man. So Matthew's gospel represents Jesus Christ as the Messiah, right? The anointed one. The ox sometimes represents Gentiles coming in, which is why Luke's gospel would have been, Luke would have been assigned to that. And Mark's gospel, from what I remember, represents Jesus Christ as the king, right, as one of the aspects. Each of these creatures, it says here, has a particular kind of role, right? So the lion represents the king of the wild animals, the ox, the kind of head of the domestic animals. Also in Babylon, the human-headed bull was a thing, was like one of these great images, in fact. Humanity, of course, being the man face, and then the eagle as the king of the birds. So it's almost like also these are like the kings of each part of creation. There's lots of different interesting imagery. Now, this is all brought together, in fact, in this image, the way in which the church sets up its architecture, right? to represent Christ as ruling over all creation, riding upon his chariots. And so you'll see here, usually in a traditionally built church, you'll have the dome with Christ the Pantocrator, ruling over all things. He's the center of everything. Everything looks towards him. Everything, and then below him you see these lots of angels, and then here at the four what's called squinches or sails, right? That connect the square with the circle, right? So the church transitions from the world to eternity, to heaven, the circle and the dome, through these four squinches, right, architecturally. And on them is represented both the evangelist and the one of the four creatures. You can see it here. And that's almost that in every dome, if this is how the architecture is built, that's how it will be depicted. And this represents then the chariot upon which Christ, the Lord, rides upon, ruling over his creation. That makes sense. So that's the role of the cherubim. The cherubim are like the throne. The cherubim are the chariots of God, right? And so what is important about that? It's important because we ourselves want to enter into that same reality as the cherubim. So, and that'll come, we'll get to that with the Cherubic Hymn, because we also want to be bearing Christ, the bearers of Christ, like the chariot bears the emperor or the king or whatever. We want to be all eyes like the cherubim, beholding the glory of God and constantly worshiping him. Wherever we turn, wherever we move, we always have the Lord before us, just like the cherubim. Okay. This comes to the other way in which the cherub are depicted, similar to a chariot, but now we see the cherubim as a throne, right? And this can definitely be seen in the book of Exodus, when God himself, when the Israelites are commanded to build an ark, the Ark of the Covenant, to house the manna bread, the Ten Commandments, etc. And upon this ark, this box upon which these things are kept, are to be made two cherubim. Now, no one really knows exactly what it looked like, how it was depicted. I found this interesting depiction. It was a very Egyptian style. But to me, I think this is a much more accurate depiction of probably what they would have depicted it as, because this is they were part of this culture, right? So they weren't totally kind of divorced from what was going on around them, but they were redeeming the imagery probably that they would have seen in Egypt and wherever else. Because already, if you look, I think I've got some images. I don't have them here, but you can find images of Egyptian chariots and Egyptian thrones with these angelic cherubic beings, kind of on the sides, bearing what would have been the pharaoh or whatever. So now these cherubim, what were they doing there? So there's lots of theories about if you look at some rabbinic commentary, right? They're seen as representing justice and the justice and mercy of God. They also the fact that the wings are intertwined represents a kind of spousal relationship, some kind of like intimacy, which was a commentary on like coming into union with God. So there's all these different images and that people talk about with these images of the two cherubim or seraphim on the throne. But ultimately, it is a throne. It's a seat upon which the presence of Yahweh was seated. Let's just say, and this would continue when the temple was built in Jerusalem. So this would have been moved around in the tent, in the tabernacle, and then later the ark would have been placed in the temple, and it would have been understood that these and that's also why they're not idols. You see, because it is now in Exodus. It's interesting, of course, we have the Ten Commandments. We're not allowed to depict anything, right? But it's not a like a overriding all images, right? Because then later on in Exodus 25, the Israelites are commanded to depict certain things, including these seraphim. Now they're not idols because they are bearing the true God. Let's just say that, the invisible God. And they represent a throne, so they're not seen as any kind of deities or something like that. So that would have been very much understood, I think, in the mind of the Israelites, that these are those beings that are bearing God, right? The presence of God. And that was very important to show that God is present among the people. Okay, so keep all of this in mind when we get to the Cherubic Hymn. So now let's look at the Cherubicon, the Cherubic Hymn that we sing. So now we've finished, we've completed the first part of the liturgy of the catechumens. We've read the gospel, and now, as we've already spoken, the liturgy is an ascent. It's like climbing a mountain. It's like going towards the divine council, the throne of God, right? And so now we sing the Cherubic Hymn. So let's first read the text before we go any further. So I'll read it in English. Oh, another interesting thing I wanted to quickly mention, I put a note here, is that at this moment, just before the singing of the Cherubic Hymn, the priest takes the antimension, which is that special cloth upon which the liturgy is served. And so he unfolds it at this moment, slightly earlier, but okay, at this moment it is unfolded. And the antimension actually represents the place upon which the presence of God is made manifest. And it's anywhere where the antimension is where the liturgy can be served. So it kind of represents the movable nature of the liturgy. So for example, let's just say we began a liturgy, right? And then the police knocked on the door and they said, we don't allow Orthodox Christians to worship here, so the liturgy is cancelled. Technically, we could fold up the antimension and go to the park somewhere far away, open it up on a table, and continue the liturgy. And that's something very important, and it represents, just like in Ezekiel's vision, that the presence of God can be made manifest anywhere where the faithful people are. But we still need that the ark, the place upon which we receive God's presence. And so the antimension can be part of that. So the antimension is opened, and we begin to sing this hymn. These are the words. We who mystically represent the cherubim, and who sing to the life-giving Trinity, the thrice holy hymn, let us now lay aside all the earthly cares, that we may receive the King of all, invisibly escorted by the angelic hosts or orders. Alleluia, alleluia, alleluia. So there's a lot actually going on in this very short hymn. Now we usually sing it very slowly. In the Greek tradition, they sing it very slow. In the Russian tradition, they usually sing it slow, but they repeat the words a number of times. But let's just look at this. So one of the things in the Greek, I'll just read the first words. Ita cherubim mystikos, so mystery. Ikonizontes. Icon, think of what's that word icon? Icon, image. And it's the same in the Slavonic. Ija cherubim taina. Taina means mystery. Obrazujushe. Obraz means image. So in English we say represent, but we could actually sing, we who mystically are images of the cherubim. That's actually a more literal translation, right? So now when we're worshiping God, we're standing around the altar, we mystically are images of the cherubim. So the cherubim, what do? They guard paradise, but they also are the chariots upon which God is taken, and they are the throne upon which the presence of God is. So we are becoming that, part of that, by worshiping God and standing at that. And this is very important because remember we spoke about the Trisagion hymn. The Trisagion hymn is we are worshiping like the angels in the vision of Isaiah saying, holy, holy, holy. It even says we sing the thrice holy hymn, right? But here we're not only now worshiping God like the cherubim and the seraphim at the throne of God, but now we are actually upbearing him, right? So we're now worshiping the Holy Trinity. Let us lay aside all earthly cares. So also this is very important because now, because we're entering in the throne of God, we no longer can be worried about worldly things, carnal desires, anything about the world. We are leaving the world and entering into heaven. And this is why the liturgy now becomes this connection of heaven and earth. We are now being received up, and God is now coming down to us, being received by us. That we may receive, so this is why, so that we may receive the King of all, Basilia, King. Tsarya. You see here the Slavonic Tsar from the Tsar or Caesar. Yeah. Um, that we may receive the King of all, escorted invisibly by the angelic orders. So now the king is being escorted, right, like the throne and the chariot, into our presence, right? And we're part of that. And why do you think we sing that? What happens during the cherubic hymn? What is actually happening? Who can
The
remember?
great entrance.
Yeah, the great entrance. So the priest, together with his, I'll jump to that slide. The priest, together with the altar servers, now enters through the temple bearing the gifts upon which they haven't been consecrated yet, but they are to become the presence of Jesus Christ among us in his body and his blood. What more could represent God with us than his actual flesh and blood being there with us mystically? Right? And so the entrance, in fact, is like the chariots of the cherubim now moving in the church. So it's a wonderful, beautiful image. Okay. Let's look at some of the history behind it. What is the origin of this hymn, this beautiful hymn that we sing? Right? It wasn't part of the early apostolic faith. What was part of the early apostolic faith surely was an understanding that when we come to worship, we are being like the angelic beings. There also surely was a sense that now we are lifting ourselves up towards the Lord. But the hymnography was authored as they try to embody that reality, as they try to articulate that reality. And so before the cherubic hymn, in fact, the hymn that was sung at this moment was "Let all mortal flesh keep silent," and we still sing that in place of the cherubic hymn during Lent. But that actually is an older hymn that was always sung at this moment. So then a new hymn was authored in the 6th century, also during the time of Emperor Justinian, and it was done, especially interestingly enough, connected to the architecture of Hagia Sophia. So this, in fact, is a floor plan of Hagia Sophia. Right, this is a great dome. Here is the altar would be here. This is what would be the Yero, the altar. The people would be standing here and in the galleries, etc., worshiping. This is the narthex, etc., etc. But what's interesting is that the gifts that were prepared in the proskomidi were kept here. Skephilaktikon, I think is the word in Greek. I can't remember. But they were kept here. It was kind of like a little fortress because things would also get stolen in those times. So they had to keep all the gold and the chalices and things safe. And so they were taken. I'm not sure the exact route, but I'm guessing it was something like this. If you can see my arrow, taken here to the altar. And so there was a procession that took place, possibly even like this. Right here, a procession took place, and so the cherubic hymn is in fact a processional hymn of moving towards the altar, and so it also would make sense why they use these words. And this was the great entrance, and so the cherubic hymn is sung during the great entrance. So in the Orthodox practice now, we have a similar thing. What happens during the cherubic hymn? First of all, the priest says a very special prayer. And let me read that first. The priest begins the prayer, and after he says this prayer, he goes and centers. So let me read you this prayer because it's a very beautiful prayer. And in fact, not many of us get to hear it at the liturgy because it's usually being said by the priest during the singing of the cherubic hymn. So this is what it says. No one bounds, so being under the kind of, let's just say, influence or tyranny of carnal desires and pleasures, is worthy to approach, draw near, or minister to you, the King of glory. For to serve you is great and awesome, even for the heavenly powers. Yet because of your ineffable and immeasurable love for mankind, you impassibly and immutably became man. You, as the master of all, became our high priest and delivered unto us the sacred service of this liturgical sacrifice without the shedding of blood, right? Because now when we serve the liturgy, we don't make another sacrifice. Jesus Christ shed his blood once and for all. So we only make it present. Indeed, Lord our God, you alone reign over the celestial and terrestrial, the heaven and the earth. Borne aloft on the cherubic throne, Lord of the seraphim and King of Israel, the only holy and resting among your holy ones. I now beseech you, who alone are good and inclined to hear, look upon me. So the priest is talking now about himself. Look upon me, your sinful and unworthy servant or unprofitable servant, and cleanse my soul and heart of wicked conscience. Enable me by the power of your Holy Spirit, clothed with the grace of priesthood, to stand before your holy table and celebrate the mystery of your holy, pure body and your precious blood. So you see how the Orthodox priesthood, constantly in the prayers, especially in the liturgy, constantly is reminded of their unworthiness, is constantly reminded that it's not through their powers or anything like that, it's through God's condescension that they are able to offer the sacrifice. I come before you with my head bowed and implore you, turn not your face away from me, nor reject me among your children, but make me your sinful and unworthy servant worthy to offer these gifts to you, for you are the one who both offers and is offered. Right? That's amazing. So Jesus Christ offers his gifts. He's the one offer, and he is himself the offering, the one who is received and is distributed. Right? O Christ our God, and to you do we offer up glory with your Father who is without beginning, and your all holy, good, and life-creating spirits, now and forever and unto the ages of ages. Amen. So that's a beautiful hymn. So the priest says not a hymn, this prayer. He says this prayer, helping him to remember now that he's coming into the presence of God, and now the offering has been taken up, has been preceded now to the altar. Then he takes the censer, and he censes the whole temple. Now, there's something very important about that, because in the temple of Jerusalem, the high priest, when he would enter into the Holy of Holies, he would cense the whole church, but no one there would be present, just him. And he would do that because they were scared to see God face to face, because they believed that they would die, basically. So the smoke would be a kind of way to make sure the mystery would not be seen, right? To veil God's presence. But now what we do when the priest censes the whole church from the high place, though, he censes everyone and all the icons as well. And so we are now brought into the Holy of Holies altogether, right? All eyes awaiting the presence of God, right? And what's interesting as well is that we sense the saints that are depicted in the icons, the angels, and the people there. We're now all becoming kind of united. Heaven and earth are united, and everyone is sensed. And that's one of the most beautiful parts of the liturgy, I find, is that when the priest senses, the saint and then the person standing next to the icon of the saint, everyone is present there, being now kind of blessed. And what can I say about that? Yeah, so he senses the whole church back into the holy place, and then now the gifts are lifted up, and the gifts are taken through the church, through the great entrance to the altar. So they're not on the altar yet; they're taken there. Now, there's of course many things happening here. It's the image of Christ going to his cross. It's the image of Christ entering into his passion, but it's also now Jesus Christ coming to his throne, settling himself among his people, right? Making himself present there. Sitting on your throne is a sign of becoming the king of all creation. And this is what is happening. Let's read what St. John Chrysostom says about this. Now, during the time of St. John Chrysostom, there wasn't a Cherubic hymn, but he's commenting on this part of the liturgy, which shows you that the early church, because remember, he was in the 4th century now, the early church understood this, what was happening at this time of the liturgy. He says this, on high, the armies of angels, now he's using the word armies, the armies of angels give glory. Below, men standing in church forming a choir emulate the same doxologies, or the hymns, or glorifications. Above, the seraphim declaim the thrice holy hymn. Below, the multitude of men send up the same, a common festival of the heavenly and the earthly, is celebrated together. One Eucharist, one exaltation, one joyful choir. Such a beautiful words from St. John Chrysostom. So we are, you can almost see it as a mirror. When we stand in church, we're a mirror of what's happening above us. And they are united in a reality. So it's not just, we're not just representing, that's why it's better to say we are now becoming actual images of the cherubim. And we're celebrating together the same Eucharist, together with the heavenly hosts, right? And so when we take the priest and his entourage of altar service come through the church, they are now those heavenly hosts bearing up the King of all, right? And this is another interesting image that also comes from the ancient world that was part of this hymn. Now, what's really interesting is that in the Byzantine tradition, but also in earlier traditions of the Romans and the Greeks, when an emperor was crowned, coronated, came back from victory, or when he was just acclaimed by his let's just say his people, his army, usually was his army, his soldiers, they would take a shield, and the emperor would stand on his shield, and they would lift up the shield. Now there's very interesting, sometimes they would actually put their spears under the shield and they would lift the emperor high up. I'm sure they had to be professionals that did it, in case he fell off or something. But this was something as part of the coronation ceremony. In fact, this is what was part of the Byzantine, the Eastern Roman Empire. That's how they would proclaim, it was part of the coronation ceremony, where they would bear up their king on a shield. And he would enter into, wherever they would, crown him on his throne, and he would be placed there. So this you can see in lots and lots of imagery. And so when we say the words, that we may receive the King of all, escorted invisibly by the angelic hosts. Sometimes the translation, I think the Greek, I'm not sure about the Greek, can't translate it perfectly now, but it actually can also mean invisibly upborne. Instead of escorted, it means borne up by the angelic hosts. So what's happening in the liturgy, in fact, is that Jesus Christ is entering victorious as the King. He is now making himself King among us, being upborn. And so when the priest is holding the discourse, he's taking it through the church. That, in a sense, also is part of that. It represents that Jesus Christ is becoming the King. So that's a really interesting part of the Cherubic Hymn. I've lost my there. Yeah, so this is what's happening during the Cherubic Hymn. Heaven and earth are united. We are bearing Christ just like the cherubs, right, in heaven. And so just like in the Trisagion hymn, we are worshiping God, but we're also bearing him as king, as emperor, whatever we may want to say. And so this is now the beginning of the liturgy of the faithful. This now hymn brings us into that mystery. And so from this moment now, everything that happens will lead to the lifting up of the gifts, the consecration of the gifts, and finally our communion, right? Our actual participating in the life, the resurrection of Jesus Christ through taking Holy Communion. So I hope it was a short one today, but well, for the usual time. But are there any questions or comments or objections? Go back to the first image. Anything that anyone would like to add?
No, thank you, Nicola. It makes me curious to look at more visuals, icon or sculpture, or about all these cherubim and the angels throughout the history. So I think I will look at that. It was really a pleasant one today.
Yeah, thank you. One thing is interesting in the Hagia Sophia. When I can't remember when it was, but basically, as we know, it became a mosque when the Ottomans took Constantinople, and they covered a lot of the mosaics and frescoes and whatever either with plaster or with writing or just plain mosaics, whatever it may have been. But when they did renovations and when I think this was quite a while ago still, they took off from, those four squinches that we spoke about. When they removed that plaster, what did they find underneath them? Images of the seraphim, just a face and wings. And so if you look up now, if you go into Google and you look up Hagia Sophia dome or something, you'll see those mosaics, and the Muslims kind of left them. There's a tradition in the Islamic culture about that, about the seraphim, because they are like bodiless beings. And so even in the Hagia Sophia, you have those four seraphim. So the dome was definitely representing the presence of Christ. Whether or not they had a pantocrator, I'm not sure, in Hagia Sophia, but the idea of them bearing Christ was even part of that architecture. Yeah. Okay, well, thank you all so much for your attention, and God bless you. We will continue with the liturgy. We'll probably have 2 more lessons on the liturgy, and then we'll continue with something else. So please send your suggestions or requests of what you would like to talk about. I'll be happy to talk about something. So thank you all so much. Have a great evening. God bless.
Good job.